Magic 87.6. Let's talk some tech with Matthew Dickerson. Hello.
Oh, hello. And yeah, absolutely. Let's talk some tech. Love talking tech.
I know, right? I don't know how this falls into tech, Matt, but white's white, but how do you get a whiter paint?
You kind of think white is white, don't you? But apparently there are grades or levels of white paint. So Purdue University have come up with the whitest white paint, if that makes any sense at all. And part of the process that they're trying to develop white paint is because they want to reduce global warming. The idea is that the whitest of white paints will actually reject some of the heat that hits the surface and allow you to run your air conditioning at a cooler level, or not run your air conditioning at such a high level to keep the place cool. They actually, in October last year, came out with the then whitest of white paints, which was 98.1% of sunlight rejected. That was 95.5% last year. This newest one hits 98.1%. Now, you go much wider than that, you think you probably got to a mirror. I'm guessing here that 100% of reflection of sunlight is probably a mirror. So instead of putting white paint there, maybe go mirror, but just below that is this whitest of white paint. Now, you know, the first question just sitting on the tip of your tongue, I know, is what about the blackest of black paints? And yes, there is a blackest of black paints. Yeah. It's called Vanta Black, and it actually absorbs 99.9% of visible light. So you've got whitest of white, blackest of black, and this is a huge industry being developed to try and have other ways, passive ways, if you like, of reducing the amount of air conditioning, heating and cooling we might need. I suppose part of the problem is in Mudgee, it gets pretty hot in summer and pretty cold in winter. So if you have the whitest of white paint to reject the sun in summer, it's also going to reject that in winter, which is what you don't want. So I assume the next thing someone wants to invent is a roof that's the whitest of white in summer and the blackest of black in winter to try and absorb heat and reject heat at the appropriate times of the year. Sounds easy?
Yeah, no, this is doing my head. It sounds like a really bad 80s paint commercial. Didn't we have that? Wasn't there someone who did that back in the 80s?
I'm sure
the brightest of bright and the colours of colour and yeah, it's just doing my head in.
You might be thinking of a toothpaste ad, I'm not sure.
I don't know. The only thing that's come into my head is trust British paint, sure can.
That's right. As long as you're happy to stand on a rocky cliff and have the ocean splash over you when you wash your brushes out.
I know, right? Yeah. Can we just go back to the bone, the off-white, the beige, the white?
I would have thought you walk into a paint store and say, I want white, they'd give you white. But apparently,
I know, right?
They now say, which level of white do you want?
I know, right, yeah.
Right, you got all that?
Yeah, sure, no worries. Okay, I'm lucky I could choose. I don't know what colour this shirt is I'm wearing today, Matt. It could be bone, it could be white, it could be grey, I don't know.
It's a lighter shade.
Yeah. I think I'm good that I'll stick to my traditional colours. My traditional colours are blue, grey and black. I'm good. Anything over that, I'm lost.
Fair enough.
Yeah. This is confusing enough for you. Spotify, we know they do streaming, but why are they now going into hardware stores?
I have no idea why they're going to venture into that whole hardware space. Companies that deliver software or streaming services, for example, like Spotify do, it's a different delivery mechanism than hardware, and going into hardware might sound exciting, but there's a whole range of things you've got to do. You've got to make the stuff for a start, then you've got to ship it out there. It's a lot more complicated than doing a streaming service. And I'm not convinced the piece of hardware they've come up with is really needed. And I think the marketing department was on holidays the day they came up with the name. They've got a thing called, get ready for it, the car thing. That's it. That's the best name that Spotify could come up with. So the car thing is a thing you put in your car to link between your mobile phone and your stereo, so that you're Bluetooth connected to your stereo, you actually get the internet service from your phone, and the car thing allows you to play your Spotify music either via voice commands or buttons on there like an old-fashioned radio, or a big knob. It's got a big knob on it so you can be driving, watch the road, don't take your eyes off the road, and reach over and turn the knob on this to go to, for example, the next song or another playlist that you might have. I'm not convinced there's a market there for it because you've got your smartphone that can do kind of these things without the knob, but it's just some little niche product that Spotify is going to try to break into hardware. Good luck to them, and not sure I'd want to be putting my house on it.
Yeah, right. Isn't that like the little FM transmitter things that came out like 10 years ago when the iPod came out?
Yeah, I think you're right. Something like that, except this thing is not an FM transmitter. This thing is focused on just allowing you to play your Spotify. So if you really love the idea of having this device and you use Apple Music, bad luck. It's just for Spotify. So car thing for Spotify, full stop. That's it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no. Is that like the Spotify analogy where they did that a couple of months ago, Matt, where they sat there and said, oh, we're going to create this brand new product, and they basically described a radio?
It does sound like it a bit, doesn't it? I know. We'll even have push buttons on it, and you push a button and it goes to a certain playlist, like a radio station.
Right? Stand by for the new exciting installment from Spotify products.
That's right. You might be onto something.
I know, right? I know. If you get this black cylindrical kind of thing and you put this kind of pointy thing on it, mate, and you spin it around, maybe you can get music out of it. I don't know. Maybe we'll pitch that to Spotify. I don't know. We'll get there.
That's right.
Now, yeah. Now, we know Google, they've been in a bit of strife, but they've been in the federal court lately, haven't they?
They have been in the federal court. I'm not sure whether Google employs more engineers or lawyers these days, because they do seem to be bounced around in various courts around the world, but it's a world first in Australia. I'm not sure if Google's happy about that, but Rod Sims is pretty happy about it. They've been found guilty of misleading customers. So the case went all the way to the federal court. The ACCC brought the case, obviously. And effectively, when you turn off your location tracking and turn off for all the services or ask for those services to be stopped, Google was still tracking your location. And so the ACCC believed that this was misleading customers, and that's a nice gentle way, a nice euphemism for saying they lied to customers. And so basically they took them to court because they said they misled consumers or customers, and the court agreed. So that there is a way to go and actually stop where Google is tracking where you are, but you've got to go into another setting with web apps to actually stop it. So just stopping location tracking, thinking that you've turned it off, is not enough to stop it. And so, yeah, look, this is an interesting case. In the whole scheme of things, Google doesn't really care that much about Australia, about Australia's petty little federal court. They probably only threw 20 or 30 lawyers at this particular problem, and they lost that. But the implications around the world, if suddenly every other nation says, well, hold on, the Australian federal court won that case, Google have been found to be misleading consumers, so let's see if we can take them on here as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Can I just say, it doesn't matter where you are in the modern world, you all should have taken note of what Orson Welles was writing. There's someone going to be watching you somewhere. And if you're so paranoid about what you're doing online or in your work, just stop it. It's simple. Don't put it there.
I watched a crime show the other day, and I thought that whole realm of crime solving, and I mean, I'm sure it's just a little bit different on TV than it is in real world, but on TV, when a crime is committed nowadays, they just simply go and look at the data on your phone, look at all the cameras that are around on traffic lights, on storefronts and all the rest of it, and then use a bit of DNA, and they've solved the problem in, well, at least the half-hour show that you might be watching. Imagine back in the old days when you had to try and solve a crime without DNA, back a fair few years before DNA was around, without cameras to track locations, without cameras to see what people were doing. How did they ever solve a crime? I don't know what they did.
I know, right? I know. Did no one watch Maths last week where the chick went to Perth and she had the iPhone there and she was blogging and then all of a sudden got caught cheating? Just don't use the phone. If you want, just.
Apparently when Australia introduced the first phone bills, and I assume it was Telstra that did it, or it might have been called Telecom back in those days, that actually had a call log on the phone bill. When people, rather than get the old phone bill, it just said, yo, $100, it said, yo, $100, and here's all the calls you've made. The divorce rate jumped in Australia because suddenly these people found out about cheating partners. So it's a bit the same with social media. What were you doing in Perth?
Yeah.
Oh, nothing, darling.
No. Why were you making a call at 3 a.m.? No reason. Next generation of smart speakers, they're coming out, and apparently They're going to be watching you.
Watching you,
Literally.
not just watching you, but watching you sleep. I mean, these things are becoming incredibly popular. 600,000 smart speakers were added to people's homes last year. They're things from like Alexa, Amazon Alexa, Apple Siri, Google's Assistant, Hey Google. So they've been added across rooms and kitchens and home offices, but they're being used now in bedrooms and even bathrooms, which is a bit scary. But the new devices are doing a whole range of things. And one of the things that they're looking at now is giving you some health tracking technology, some sleep tracking technology. So it will actually monitor how much you move around. It will monitor your breathing, look at your chest going up and down, and then give you some advice in the morning and say, hey, Andrew, you only slept for 8 hours last night and it was a bit uneasy, your sleep. You only had good sleep for 4 of those 8 hours and you breathe a bit too quickly. So here's some advice about that. Stop drinking a carton of beer before you go to bed maybe, or whatever it might be. So all these things. So there's a few things that are coming as well. The new Echo from Amazon is actually on a swivel base. So you can actually be on a speakerphone or a video phone call with that. And as you move around the room, it will follow you around. So it's tracking you, which just gets a bit creepy that you're having a conversation with someone, but this device knows where you are and moves around to make sure it tracks where you are. They use a combination of radar, low-level radar, to actually work out where people are, stereo microphones, and a video camera as well. So you've got all these things just watching you, looking for you to make your life better, obviously, but it just, I don't know. It's a bit like those paintings that you look at and you think the eyes follow you around. This thing really is following you around.
Yeah, my wife's got a smartwatch, Matt, and that already does that. And she looks at it habitually every day. She's like, oh, yeah, I slept for 7 hours last night, but I only had like an hour and something of deep sleep. And then all of a sudden I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Then I woke up at 3 o'clock. And I'm like, I reckon they create more paranoia about not sleeping than actually be effectively tell you how much you did sleep.
So you might get a bit anxious and stressed about the fact that your watch told you weren't sleeping last night. So what am I going to do about that? And so it just builds up.
Yeah, I know, right? I know. I don't need a watch to tell. Just look at my eyes and they'll tell you that I'm not getting enough sleep. I'll tell you, look at these bags.
Yeah.
I got shocker bags under my eyes, man. It's terrible. But let's talk about this one finally. And the survey shows Australians want to buy an electric car, but the sales have stalled.
Sales have stalled, excuse the very bad pun there from you. They're sitting at around 0.7%. But surveys constantly show that 50% of Aussies would consider their next car as an EV. So why the disconnect? What's happening there? When you see places across Europe, across the US and the UK, they're hitting consistently double digits, 10, 12% already, and their likelihood of buying the next car is similar to us, around that 50%. Look, take Volkswagen. They'll probably become the world's largest EV maker before we know it. Tesla's still there at the moment, but Volkswagen are on the march. They sold 212,000 EVs last year across the world. In Australia, plus or minus one, they sold 0 EVs in Australia. So you'd have to say, why? Right. Now, most of these car makers are saying they're skipping Australia because the government policy says that you effectively have no reason to go and look for electric vehicles. There's nothing in terms of incentives. There's not the charging infrastructure. In fact, places like Victoria are taxing you additionally if you own an EV down in Victoria. So car manufacturers are saying, well, we're not going to go to Australia when there's all these disincentives in place. We'll go to the countries that are encouraging EV sales because it's easier for them to sell cars in those countries. So it's a bit of a frustration. It's kind of one of those things that it's in that supply and demand. It's really not the demand that's lacking in Australia. It's the supply, but the supply is lacking because manufacturers don't have confidence in the Australian government in terms of their attitude towards EVs.
Yeah, the only one that's actively promoting EVs in this country, Matt, would have to be Hyundai at the moment. I see a lot of ads from Hyundai for their EV at the moment, and I think people are asking for them. But I think it's not only a government thing. I also think that the dealers that are actually selling these cars don't have the confidence in selling them either.
Yeah, it's hard to know which comes first, isn't it? Whether it's the government incentives meaning the dealers aren't finding that people are interested in buying them, or the dealers aren't pushing them, so the government's not interested. But it's interesting because we have a huge uptake of solar. We've got one of the highest per capita uptakes of solar, rooftop solar, across the world. So you find that the research says that people that have got rooftop solar are often interested in buying an EV as well. They've got an eye on the environment, so they're interested in looking after the environment in different ways. But it's just not matching up. The rooftop solar people are not buying EVs. Some of them are, but they're not in the same percentages, again, because they're just not seeing the, I suppose, return on their investment overall, or they're probably not seeing that it's a close enough cost comparison. And I've done some cost comparisons. If you looked at the overall total cost of ownership of an EV versus a petrol car, they're not far off. And people are saying they'd pay a 10% premium for an electric vehicle, but when they look at some prices and they see a $30,000 ICE car and they see a $50,000 EV, they go, nah, too far out at the moment. No government incentives. I'm going to be charged extra in per kilometre rate to drive that. Nah, I'll just go with my good old-fashioned ICE.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because we are such a car culture country, we're so used to driving so many long kilometres. Like it freaks people out overseas that we'll drive 1,000 kilometres to go see a relative. You know what I mean? I think that's the thing as well. If I want to drive from Mudgee to Melbourne, I've got to stop for an hour in Holbrook. You know what I mean? It's like, what am I going to do for an hour in Holbrook? I'll let the car to charge.
And look, I think part of that process is really education. But you're right. We do love our cars. We love driving. We can do that in EVs, but we just need a government to get on board and bring the manufacturers to the table.